Welcome back to the Wellbeing Show. I'm your host. I suppose I'm your guest. I'm not your guest. I'm not your guest, John. You're my guest. So that's how on it I am this evening. It's Wednesday, the 9th of November, and we've got a very special guest with us, a returnee who's just literally flown in from New York. I can't believe it. He went to New York, did a marathon, flew in, and he's now on this thing, which is, I don't know what that says about him, but there you go. But we'll talk to Jon in a minute. He's been with us in the past, so it'd be good to have him back. If you're listening to this on Wednesday the 9th, then good chances that it's live as opposed to sort of a repeat on Dave or something like that. If it's a repeat on Dave, you should know because you're watching Dave, but they haven't repeated us in a while. But if it's live on a Wednesday the 9th, then do feel like joining in. That'd be great to hear from you. My number's 07506 319 745. That's +44. Knock off the first 0 if you're coming from abroad, and probably best to do it on WhatsApp, to be honest, and send us a message or drop a message in one of the streaming platforms that we're on, which is, I think, at the moment, Facebook Live and YouTube. And James, who's hiding away in the background somewhere, will surf the waves and sort of try and pick up your comments and send them in. But that's enough of me. And welcome, Jon. I mean, I don't know if I'm in awe of you or just think you're mad. I don't know what to say. You've literally got off a transatlantic flight after having run a marathon, and here you are. Welcome.
No, it's lovely to be here. You know, when I got the message saying let's catch up on Wednesday, I can obviously check my diary, and it was clear. But it's kind of flew in. I landed into Heathrow at 6 a.m. this morning. I learned that you can't land any earlier than 6 a.m. So the flight back from New York was quite quick. We did quite a bit of circling around London before landing in this morning. But I thought, it's great to catch up.
Tell us about New York. What were you doing out there? You're running a marathon, but this is what you do, isn't it?
Yeah, right. So, it was probably a year ago. So, as we've talked about this before, I ran the London Marathon 5 years ago with my friend Jon, and it was really that started my journey as talking about openly and publicly around how mental health has impacted me, how it's impacted my friends and family. And Jon, who I was running London Marathon 5 years ago, sadly lost.
I'm going to stop you for a second.
Yeah.
And just be aware that because your elbows are on by your computer, every time you're talking, it's wobbling. So
okay, sorry about that.
No, it's all right. It just looks like you're in the middle of an earthquake.
So as I was saying, the reason for running the London Marathon 5 years ago was my friend Jon, his sister, had sadly taken her own life, and she'd had a period of postnatal depression. And we obviously had 2 years of lockdowns, and realised last year that it was going to be the 5-year anniversary since Jon and I ran London. And Jon now lives in the US, and I guess London's an iconic marathon, and so's New York. And we're just like, I was like, messaged Jon, what do you think? Do you think we've got any chance? Because even like last year, the idea of doing another marathon was pretty ridiculous. But this time last year, you couldn't even get on a plane, right? You couldn't get to the US. So even floating the idea of like just getting to America was going to be difficult, let alone run around New York. So so kind of put that out there. Similar when we ran London, we wanted to run it for a mental health charity. And I pinged off a few emails to New York and US based charities. And amazingly, the New York Samaritans of New York came back and they said, we'd love you to run for us if you want to come over. So
wonderful.
So that was probably around this time last year, I guess, that I had that kind of plan to do it.
Yeah, I remember talking to you about it actually when you were in the planning stages, and it's difficult to remember what it was like when we were still sort of in the pandemic and the world had still shut down. I can't remember now, but yes, that's right. It was like the idea of. I mean, I used to get those FCO emails saying different travel restrictions everywhere. I've stopped them now because I don't need them anyway, because we're sort of back to being able to travel. And I was saying to you, I had COVID, and I'm like, oh yeah, whatever, COVID, because of the vaccine and stuff like that. We just seem to have moved on completely. But that was a real sort of leap of faith you made, which sort of has worked out for you.
Yeah, I think it was. But it definitely seemed like it felt like we should do something. And it was kind of, I thought it'd be nice to kind of reflect, kind of looking back on what has happened over the last 5 years, some of the positive things from it as well. And I was also, I've kind of forgotten, but a marathon is a very, very long way. It's a kind of, I forgot how far it was, and especially when doing it in New York, I think it feels even longer. It felt like running 2 marathons.
Yeah. What was it like in New York with these, I guess, people friendly, welcoming and all that sort of stuff? Because they are in New York. I mean, it's very...
Yeah, I would probably say that compared to London, it was around the same number of people out on the streets as London. London's just epic, and New York was exactly the same. But it was louder, for every scream that a person in London does, it was deafening. And we had our names on our shirts, and because we're both called John, just loads of people were just like shouting John and John as we were running along, or John squared, or
right,
the double Johns, and so the crowd was incredible.
And where were you running? Which bit, on Manhattan Island or somewhere else in New York?
Yeah, so you start out on the island, and you just work your way up, going through, right up to the Bronx. So you're doing all of the areas of New York, something like 6 bridges that are they're like drawn out, kind of really slow hills.
Yes.
But so you kind of had periods of quiet on these really big bridges. Like the first bridge is something like 2 miles long. And then the moment you come off the bridge, it's just a wall of sound of people just screaming and shouting. Wow. And I'm sure we talked about this before, but I think that is what is absolutely amazing about marathons. And you've just got other human beings that are just shouting at other human beings to just keep on going. And it's a lovely side of humanity. Just seeing so many people out that all just cheering you on.
They say they're all day as well. I mean, these people are really committed, aren't they? Because they'll wait until the last person makes it, and
well, they waited for me and John, so they were.
I'm sure you weren't last.
We weren't last, but it was really humid. The weather's just been like incredible in New York. So I think they've had some of their record-breaking kind of November. So it's really, really humid. It was
hard work.
Hard
work. And how long were you out in New York for in total?
So we went out on the Friday, and then came back this morning. So tried to cram in, got a bit of karaoke in, got a nice spa in, as well as going to the theatre. So really made the most of being in New York, and it's just an incredible city. Have you been to New York?
Quite a few times. It's one of my favourite places. I love it, to be honest.
Yeah.
I've not been really outside of Manhattan, I have to say. I sort of, when I go, I tend to be there for a few days and stay on the island, and it's absolutely epic.
Yeah.
But I like America as well. I'm sort of a great fan of the US. I'm a bit frightened of it at the moment because I think it's a bit violent at the moment, but it's sort of post-Trumpian world. It just it seemed like a very strange place to me now, not the sort of America I know, to be honest.
Yeah, and they're all literally getting ready for the elections when I was out there, and and it's interesting. It was interesting, similar. I think when I've been to New York, I've kind of stuck to kind of certain bits, but it was interesting running the different parts of New York and seeing it, and the Bronx, and you could just get better.
And was it the first
flavor.
marathon post-pandemic? Was it?
Yeah. So it's
people really must have been ecstatic, to be honest.
Yeah, completely. So I think there may have been like a smaller one last year. Definitely, it wasn't open to any international runners.
Yeah. Because of course, New York itself was really smashed by the pandemic. I mean, it was horrific there at times. I think sort of. So it must have been really quite a hoopla to sort of have an international event again. Yeah,
and it did feel like New York was getting back to normal. And that was also really lovely to see. It was, like you say.
And how was it? Just thinking about the last 5 years. Then, what were your thoughts about it? Because you've been on a longer journey than a 26-mile marathon. I mean, it's been quite quite an extraordinary journey for you personally, I think.
Yeah, there was lots of, I think. But even before getting on the flight out to New York, there, a lot of reflection over the last few months. About actually being quite proud looking back at some of the things being able to do. Because sometimes, especially when you look at it over 5 years, you think, wow, that's, some things like take a long time to do. But I think it's really good when you look back and you kind of forget how difficult things were. And I think it's nice to at least try and give yourself a moment to think, that was really cool. That
prior to the marathon in London, would you have thought of yourself as a sort of mental health advocate or champion?
Never, ever. I don't. My line of work is very much wanting to be behind the camera, not in front of it. I didn't. Just the thought of doing any kind of public speaking, I'd just be, very, very nervous, feel very uncomfortable. A lot of imposter syndrome, I guess, of like, I would always, the teams I'd manage, I would always want them to be doing the talking, right? And I'm, definitely more comfortable in the background. But I think, when we first met, what was when I first spoke was just the overriding feedback from people saying, guys don't speak, they don't talk about their emotions, they don't. And I was like, you're right. That's me as well. And I think being given a very public platform and being accepted meant that obviously if it had gone really, really horribly badly, it would have probably ended that day, right? But the fact that I did get a lot of really positive feedback, but also just, I think I got that feedback just because there has been so few men talking about their emotions, their mental health.
For the people that don't know, because I know, and we're in danger of having a conversation where we share knowledge. What did happen? What did you do to come out of the closet, as it were, so that people know who don't know you?
Yeah, so when Jon phoned me up to say that his sister had died, that brought out, obviously, as it would in anybody, a whole range of emotions. But I think the one that really surfaced to the top was one of anger that his sister hadn't been able to get the help that she needed in 2016, when I, really thought that GPs and other professionals would be able to help if somebody was struggling with their mental health. And that was a real shocker for me. And I was deeply angry about that. And I heard my mental health was really, really bad with my first job. At the kind of the turn of the millennium in 99, and I was sectioned. I was in hospital for a period of time, and I was off work for about a year, and it took me, a long time to kind of build up my confidence and get back into work. But the stigma that existed around mental illness meant that I wasn't going to share my story or tell anybody about it. And when I was a teenager, kind of 17, my dad suffered from depression, and he sadly took his life, and we didn't get any counselling or support. And even when he was sick, it was very, very difficult to get the right kind of help for him. But I definitely, by the time in 2016, I thought things had got better. And when I realised that there was still obviously people out there struggling, I wanted to do something to in her memory. And also I didn't, I just thought I need to do something. I didn't know what I needed to do, but I Googled looking for a mental health charity that supports first-time families and young families. There was a charity called Best Beginnings, and they were part of a campaign that the Royals had done called Heads Together, which brought 8 different mental health charities together. And I got picked, I guess, within the whole campaign, which had a lot of celebrities. I was, I guess, picked as somebody who had their own story as well. And I shared that in January of 2017, which I thought was going to be a small group of people when I was first asked to do it. And it was a couple of hundred people of press and media and who knows who in that room, alongside William, Harry and Kate and Rio Ferdinand, and did a live lunchtime news pre-record for Channel 5 and other interviews, and shared my story and said what had happened to me. And that was obviously a massive surprise for my friends that had known me for years. They didn't know that was my story. I've kept it from everybody. And here I was on the news, and people were like, John, I've just what's this all about? It's like, it's like if you'd known me for like 15 odd years, you wouldn't have known anything about my own mental illness, my dad. It was not a subject I was ever going to talk about.
Which in and of itself is extraordinary, isn't it, John, to think about it, that these very significant life events that you went through were just not something you would normally talk about with people.
Yeah, and things are improving. They really are. I do think 5 years on, because we are talking about, you've got your show, and there is more conversation that's happening now. And it's almost like when you start to pick at it slightly, you realize how ridiculous it is. It's like, oh, you've had a significant bereavement. Yeah. Well, probably good that you go and talk to somebody about that. And who that is or what that is can be very different for different people. But you should probably go and find a group or somebody to talk about it, not just bury those emotions. And I think one would hope these days, one would hope that, say, a young man experienced a tragic bereavement such as yours, that somebody would be proactive about it and saying, we're going to talk about this, Yeah. and a teacher or a mentor or somebody would just go, look, we're going to talk about it. Sit down. Let's figure out what's going on. Right. Yeah. And like the statistics into suicide and those bereaved by suicide, there's a lot of research, really, really good research. And there's a person called Sharon McDonald in Manchester has been doing some amazing studies, which then also starts to unearth, like, those that have been bereaved by suicide, the percentage increases of somebody potentially having a suicide attempt as well. So it's like statistically, so it's like if the lights of a traffic light system of like, oh, yeah, this has now gone from a green to an amber. There are health professionals. There's data available now to start to say, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. Proactive. But it's one of those things that would automatically be on one of my company's checklists is, have you had these types of experiences? Because we know these are adverse life experiences, which can be repeated. But nobody talked about it with you. You didn't talk to anybody. Then you had a period of And for people that don't know, being sectioned is a really serious thing. It's not fun at all. And it can be quite traumatizing for people, actually. I don't know if your event was traumatizing or welcoming, but generally it's not welcoming. That's why they section.
Yeah, like for me, it was a number of years ago. Again, I think I'm trying to be optimistic that things for people that are sectioned is starting.
It has not improved at all.
And
it's got worse. It's definitely got worse around sectioning. But for people that don't know, what we're talking about is when your freedom is taken away from you and you have enforced treatment, usually inside a hospital ward, against your will often. But you certainly don't have any choice in the matter. And you will usually spend between 3 to 6 months on a ward. Yeah.
And it's for me, it was a very, very confusing period of time, is probably how I can kind of put it. There was obviously some kind people in there, but there was also a lot of control, a lot of following a system, and you don't have much or any real say over what happens for the time you're there.
I think the professionals try their best, but there's a lot of us who've been in the field for a long time who think that the Mental Health Act, which is the legislation that's used, needs to be changed and gotten rid of. And actually, we have another piece of legislation that's been enacted in Northern Ireland. We're not quite enacted. It would be enacted if they got their arses together and actually the Parliament there sat, but they've got a very revolutionary piece of legislation around which disposes of incarceration and looks at things in a very different way. But certainly there was, just prior to the pandemic, I have to say, I went to the Houses of Parliament subgroup on mental health, which is reporting back on the review of the Mental Health Act. And they were a bunch of cowards. They copped out. They should have repealed the Mental Health Act and replaced it, but they didn't. They copped out.
What do you think was the reason? Why did they?
Vested interests from people like the Royal College of Psychiatrists. They don't want to give up their power. It's really that simple. Psychiatry is, as a profession, it's dead in the water, really. It's no longer relevant because we've moved into much more psychological models. Careful, I might get on a soapbox here, but the British Society of Psychologists, some years ago now, quite spectacularly turned around and said that psychiatry is over and it's irrelevant. And the sort of biological model of mental health is largely, but the Royal College of Psychiatrists just don't want to give up their power. I think that's it. I don't think there's any other reason for it than that. And there's a lot of, for a standard ward that people get incarcerated into, which has something like 10 patients for 6 months, it costs for those 10 patients £1 million to incarcerate them. And that's where the main mental health budget goes. That's where all the mental health money goes. And it goes into ward-based services. And there was a big move towards changing mental health services with a thing called IAPT, Increased Access to Psychological Therapies, which was a psychological therapy approach. And it is incredibly successful. And because it's primary care, you can self-refer. Nobody's in charge of it. There are no consultants who control it or you, and it's a really successful program. It's something I think the UK should be very proud of. We're one of the few countries that's got that. So in terms of improvement to mental health services, IAPT is definitely right up there. But there's still a preponderance of the money goes on these wards that end up destroying people's minds, and they don't really help. I don't know what your experience of being incarcerated was. Most people's is it doesn't really help long term, to be honest.
Yeah, for me, I lucky is not the right word because, but I was able to. I was on a ward section for about a month. So yeah,
that's a brief intervention, and you are lucky.
And but I think that's maybe helps with like probably the color of my skin. Also the fact that my mum and other people were being very proactive in trying to talk with consultants. So I think that I could have been in there a long time, but I was able to get out. But then when I got out, that's where, I went in with having had a psychotic episode and kind of left with depression, and still didn't have, I didn't have any counselling. I didn't have any talking therapies. They gave me a badly photocopied bit of paper that told me to go to a community centre that literally had everybody in it. Literally anybody from society that was on tough times, go to this place. And again, probably all very well meaning, but I definitely didn't feel like I fitted in to where I was being told to go once I'd been released from hospital. And just that's where it spiraled. That's where it got actually tougher once I got out of that mental health unit.
Which is why we do need to have these types of conversations, I think, because mental health provision of that sort has become very, very ghettoized, and it needs to be dragged out of that ghetto. And it's become a sort of social control mechanism rather than anything else. And it shouldn't be. It really shouldn't be. It's sort of, we keep throwing good money after bad around those types of services, I think. So, but you came through that, and you got to this point where this event happened, which inspired you to go on this run, which then gave you the courage to go and do this extraordinary press conference. And then what was the next step? What happened next after that?
So, just that year of 2017 was a very surreal year of, obviously it was all building up to running the London Marathon, but there was kind of other moments where I was asked to do other talks on panels about suicide, which I just thought sounded ridiculous, that it was a word that I would never even say. And I was like, I wouldn't even, I'd rather have say a swear word than say suicide, because it was so triggering. And they were like, oh, can you come and talk on this panel? And we've got, X, Y, and Z. And then they told me the name of the panel. I was like going, well, nobody's going to turn up to that, right? I was like, who would turn up? And then it would be like a packed room of people. And so I was like, oh, right, okay. People do potentially want to talk about mental health. So I was like, this is good. Then there was like a marathon training day at the Olympic Park. There was a famous relay race with the Three Royals, and I was in one of the relays with Paula Radcliffe and Adele Roberts is an amazing Radio 1 DJ, and and so there was some real strange moments that year, and it was incredible. It really, I think that the Heads Together campaign for certain sections of society within the UK and internationally started a different narrative around mental health. Where
I think the narrative, those lads, but they're men, obviously, Royals. Those two chaps did an extraordinary job, to be honest. I mean, I was really blown away by it.
Yeah, it really was, because they changed it by, for me, if you said mental health, I would always flick to like the negative. I'd be thinking of, as you say, kind of incarceration and like the old kind of hospitals and, like dangerous people, all of these things. You kind of mentioned mental health 5+ years ago. That's what people thought was all the negative. And I think it was a very simple message, and it was, I guess, deliberately simple, that we all have mental health. And that did at least start to make people think, going, oh, what? Because people just thought mental health is mental illness. And they did an incredible job. they use their platform for really good outcomes.
And this had sort of quite a lasting impact on what you did, didn't it, in the way you did your life? I mean, it wasn't just a one-off event. Things changed quite radically for you, I think, didn't they?
Yeah, so I think through my career that I've kind of found myself in the middle of in between change. So my start of my career was, I guess, when we had very, very the first slow dial-up internet and that moving to kind of faster, always-on internet. And I guess through my career, I've definitely found myself in moments of time of change that's happening, and I get excited about change, and whether it's gadgets and buying things that I end up throwing away or stuck up the loft, or I like looking ahead. I like kind of joining the dots between two areas that maybe don't seem that obvious to connect. And mental health was one of those areas that, again, what we're talking about, like certain people that have been doing this for 20, 30 odd years, and you're starting to look at the things that you're meeting other people that are doing really interesting things and different approaches to looking after people's health, and you're coming up with some of your own ideas as well. And you're like, this is cool, we're doing this, people like it, but it seems strange that it's just me, right? It's just it's bizarre sometimes. Any other career that you're in, it's usually very competitive and there's no new ideas a lot of the time. Whereas definitely around kind of mental health and some of the innovation that's happening and different approaches to looking after people's health is incredibly exciting. Because the old way of doing it hasn't been working.
Absolutely, without a doubt. Because it's the old way of doing it is too far downstream, essentially. You treat somebody when they're very seriously ill. That's a bad model in anybody's work about anything. So, and also, the facts are, and this is gender differences, are men tend to end up on psychiatric wards and women tend to end up having the more common mental health problems are depression and anxiety. The only reason for that are cultural differences in getting help. The reason why men end up psychotic is that they don't get help soon enough. That's what happens, right? These things will just get worse if you don't get help, because psychosis is very much connected to stress and anxiety and all these types of things. And then the bad habits you get around that. So what were the sort of innovations that you were seeing and that you were involved with yourself around this?
Yeah, so one of the projects that I've been involved in over the last few years is called What's Going On in Your Head. And I do this with a documentary maker called Liz Smith. And so Liz is obviously incredibly, award-winning, very good at telling stories. And through my work that I was doing, I was meeting some incredibly interesting people that had or still has like different mental illnesses. But when I was talking to them and we were kind of getting to know each other and going for a coffee, whatever it was, there would usually be something creative that they really enjoyed doing. And that could be drawing, it could be poetry, and it was like, it's like as we get to know, as you meet somebody for the first time and you get to know somebody, you get to know them for their talents, but sometimes, especially with a mental illness, obviously your confidence can be very low, your self-esteem. So even though you've got this amazing talent, you're probably very unlikely to want to go out and shout about it if you're really struggling with your mental health. And so what we've been able to do with What's Going On in Your Head is put on a series of events where we'll pick a certain mental illness or a disorder, and we will explore that through performance art, so through music and dance and poetry. And we've done a lot of shows now, in real life and during lockdowns online as well.
Yeah.
And people come away from the show thinking, well, that was really entertaining. I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
But also I now have a greater understanding around eating disorders or anxiety or depression. But they're not seeing the performer for their illness. They're seeing them for their, like, wow, wasn't that, an amazing rapper? Wasn't that amazing, an amazing actress? So we've done some really interesting projects for World Suicide Prevention Day. We've done like a 20-minute film. And so it's all the feedback that you get from putting on these types of events that hadn't really been done before. Because I think a lot of the people that have been involved with our shows have kind of been hidden away from society. There's not been a platform for them to showcase their talents.
And it's the talents that people maybe have developed as part of the struggles that they have. These things are helping them recover and inspiring them to move on, and then that can also be offered, I guess, to people as a possibility for you. Well, maybe this is going to help you as well if you're struggling. Maybe you can try this for yourself. And certainly, I mean, my background is the arts, which you may or may not know, but that's where I started off. And certainly, without doubt, I know the inherent healing capacities of the arts, full stop. And they're often the opposite of sort of trauma and depression, anxiety is a place where people can heal and grow. Certainly was for me growing up. Definitely how I use the arts myself. I agree completely. Definitely part of my recovery. When I was able to get a new job, it was very close to the Tate Modern that was just opening at that time. Wow. Yes.
And so I would go to the Tate Modern when it had recently opened, and just going there was just so good for me to be in this big open space with lots of art, and there's those types of things actually really helped my recovery. It was going to galleries and looking at different artists, and then learning about the artists and the challenges they had as well. And
which quite a few have, to be honest. And the Tate Modern in particular has done some fantastic work at exhibiting the work of what some people call outsider arts, but people who have experienced troubles. I mean, everybody knows about, I guess, the famous one being that Dutch painter, what's his name, who chopped off his ear.
Van Gogh. Van
Gogh, right. So everybody knows that he had severe mental health problems, and if you haven't seen it, folks, one of the most, I'm going to well up and cry about this. It's one of the most moving Doctor Who episodes I've ever seen. Is where they go back and get Van Gogh, and the character playing Van Gogh, they bring him to an exhibition. I think it's at the Tate, a retrospective of his work, and they get one of the curators to talk to him, not knowing it's Van Gogh, about the impact of Van Gogh, and this guy just goes over talks the truth about how influential he is, and the actor playing Van Gogh is bowled away. It's a beautiful episode. It's sort of a really moving episode. Well worth going to see, folks. If you haven't seen it yourself, John, I would check it out. Just Google Doctor Who Van Gogh.
Okay, I'll make a note of it here.
It's amazing. It's really amazing. But there's been a lot of artists and a lot of people involved in the arts who've struggled with quite severe mental health problems. And there's been retrospectives on a very famous Japanese artist who has been in and out of psychiatric wards and so on, and many sort of well-known. Spike Milligan, for example, had bipolar. And I remember way back in the beginning of my career when dinosaurs were still wandering the earth, it was that far back in time, we had a fantastic doctor come in to one of the hospitals I was working in. who herself had severe and enduring mental health problems. And she'd done a fantastic piece of research looking at the arts and mental illness. And she wanted, sort of her research was looking at whether the arts caused mental illness or helped, and et cetera, because there was it was fascinating. She found that the certain types of art forms had certain types of mental illnesses because they weren't. So, for example, if you had bipolar, you weren't an actor because you wouldn't be able to get on stage when you were either very high or very low. But you could do it if you had other types of disorders. But you would, if you had bipolar, you're more likely to be a writer or a painter. So it's sort of like interesting piece of research.
Really good.
It was really fascinating. And she was a painter herself as well as a psychiatrist and very humane person. So there's a whole interesting area, I think, of stuff like that, where I think that the arts and that those communities are, in a sense, much more welcoming and accepting of diversity and difference. You know, including mental health problems.
Yeah, completely agree. And
that
again, if you
engage, I think is really important. I don't know what your experience is.
Oh, say it again now, sorry.
What it is it's becoming part of a community, I think. It's not necessarily just the art form, but it's the fact that you're with other people who can accept you even with or expect you to have these idiosyncrasies, if you like.
Yeah, agree. I think having people that you feel safe and is so important, that they're on the same kind of wavelength.
Would you personally have ever imagined that your experiences would transform within your life? You know, these very dark, difficult experiences would have a transformative effect on your life and become, if you like, a birth, in a sense, a new avenue of sort of financial growth, career growth, relationship growth. Would that have ever occurred to you, do you think?
What of having had those earlier challenges in my life? I think doesn't matter when in your life, isn't it? When you're going through a really tough time, you know, there's part of me that there must be a reason that I'm going through this. I've got, you know, that. So, you know, trying to be, you know, I remember being in hospital sectioned, and it almost felt like this shower that had literally, you know, you turn it on, and it just literally were just little drips that were coming down, and you know, it felt very grey and horrible, right? And again, like that feeling of, why am I here? Am I going through this? Am I, you know, once I get out the other side, is there a reason for it? And but yeah, as kind of time went on from being very ill and just kind of plugging myself into a career that I quite liked and having relationships, that kind of line of thoughts was like put to one side, because the rest of my life was going okay. But there was definitely moments, you know, like I ended up in the same hospital that my dad had been in only a few years ago, a few years previous, and you kind of
know that. That's really
And so you like, oh, if you were going to write this story, this is like, that's quite a horrible plot twist, is to like find yourself in the same space that only your dad was in a few years previous to when he was ill. So yeah, there was, I don't know, there was definitely moments where I thought, am I being put through this because actually I will get through it and something good will come out of it. But I think that definitely after about 4 or 5 years of starting to kind of feel more stable and on my 2 feet again, I kind of definitely put that thinking right to the back of my mind, I guess.
But you were like stable, I'm not going to go there, I'm just going to get on with my life and all that.
Yeah. That was a period of my life, and I put it to bed, right? People like Stephen Fry would talk about mental health. We've got, that was kind of my thought about it. And they don't need Jon Salmon talking about it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we do. I'm glad you did start talking about it. And if the Royals did nothing else good, they got you talking, which is always a good thing. But I'm linking it too, because I know that you're working on, and you've got a new conference coming up very soon called Hope, and there is quite a lot of evidence, and I was talking about this a lot during the pandemic, about if people can have this word hope, or if they can have a sense of some bigger meaning or purpose during times of struggle, they're less likely to be destroyed by the struggle. The evidence is quite clear about that. And often people talk about it in terms of spiritual terms or in religious belief. You don't have to have any belief in anything, but it is this psychological capacity to see that there might be meaning or purpose in the difficult event. Yeah. And that's really important as a sort of psychological survival skill. And I was interested as to whether you had that. And it's interesting that you had it, even though when you didn't need it anymore, it just went to one side. And I wonder if unconsciously somewhere that's informed the choice of the word hope for this conference. So tell us about Hope, this conference.
Yeah, so we had an idea. So one of the other projects I've been involved in is I'm the co-CEO of a collective called the Speakers Collective. Mm-hmm. And so when I was sharing my lived experience, I'd mentioned Stephen Fry, but another person that had been doing amazing work in the space of trying to reduce kind of the stigma was a guy called Johnny Benjamin. And
Johnny Wells, good guy. Yeah,
Johnny's just, what an absolutely lovely human being. Mm. And he emailed 17 of us, and I'd never met Johnny. We'd kind of known each other on social media and bits and pieces. And so to kind of get an email from him to say, do you want to, meet up and discuss about how we can support each other? Because there's actually, in the campaigning space, there's very little support there. Usually people that are on the radio campaigning about something, they don't have a team of 50 people around them. They probably, it's just them. Yeah. And even though they're having real impact, hopefully, and change, there's also a lot of negativity that can come your way, especially if you're challenging a certain narrative that's maybe, different to popular.
Yeah, and also, I've talked to Johnny about this. There's also a lot of vultures in the field who just like to make money and scam people and stuff like that. And Johnny's not one of them, and neither are you, and neither am I. But there was a big movement for a while in the corporate sphere of getting in these people with lived experience and making money out of them. It's sort of unpleasant stuff. And but Johnny is one of those. He's a core activist, is Johnny. He really is. Has been all along, and he's sort of said he's a bit difficult to be around at times because of that. But he's a great campaigner and fights for rights. So
definitely. And so out of that meeting, which was, we decided to kind of set up this kind of informal group of people with lived experience, not just talking about mental health, but stigmatized kind of lived experience, and so that over 5 years, that's now built. We've got over like 120, 30 members.
Amazing.
All around the UK, all different lived experience. So we've got people that have survived breast cancer or losing a limb or a brain tumor and severe mental illness. So we've got this amazing group of people now that are all inspirational in what they do. But fundamentally, as I was saying, they're on their own a lot of the time, or they've got a really good idea. They can see the in their local area, the struggles that may be happening, and they're wanting to do something, and a lot of the time they have done something, and they have set up their own charity. But as you say, kind of, you mentioned like the corporate end of it, where there is money literally rolling around.
Yes.
You've then got the other extreme of, like Jake Mills, who had some real struggles with his own mental health. He's a comedian based in Liverpool. But it's like, why is there not a database to access mental health services?
Yeah. And
he came up with the idea of creating the Hub of Hope. That he did that in his bedroom, and that has now become the UK's largest database, I think, for kind of mental health signposting. But did he have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of pounds behind him? No, it was just him and an Excel spreadsheet, and over time. And so what we wanted to do with the Hope Conference was create a conference for people that were at that grassroots stage of their, they've been campaigning a bit, and now they're the Speakers Collective. We're all about trying to make sure that people with lived experience are getting paid for their time when they're sharing their lived experience. Again, you kind of touched on it as well. It was very common for people that were not being, were going to be out of pocket a lot of the time. They'll be going to these kind of big, expensive conferences and not even being paid for their.
No, I mean, it's like Freudian nightmare, because that's what Freud did with his patients. He would bring in these women, and loads of doctors would pay him, and they would perform, and it was like performing monkeys. And that's some of those conferences. We've been to some of those conferences, and I find them offensive, to be honest, because somebody's making a lot of money out of them, and it's not the people who've got the lived experience, and it really pisses me off, to be honest.
Yeah, and like I guess I understand why those types of conferences exist, and for different corporate organizations. But I think that was like the thing, like there just was no conference that really was there for people that, as we described, that are more.
You're a much better politician than I am, John.
And that was it. It was like, okay, well, let's do an awesome conference with amazing speakers.
Right.
Let's not do it in London. Let's do it in Birmingham. Let's try and do it in the middle of the country. Let's make the ticket super cheap, but make sure it's got a really good lunch and coffee and all of that. And then in the afternoon, let's do lots of training. So if you want to learn how to do a podcast, if you want to do mental health kind of basic kind of crisis intervention training, fundraising. So you really come out of the conference of having hopefully been inspired, but also learning some new skills. And it's up to like 100 people. So we're not trying to create something that's like for 1,000. We want everybody to walk in. We know that most of the people that are going to be there don't know each other, but I can guarantee that when they walk out at 5 o'clock on Friday, we will have made sure that everybody knows each other and feels truly connected. And I think with so many conferences, you just don't get that. You kind of you may just, while you're queuing for the coffee, you may have that moment to serendipity may work in your favor, but a lot of the time the big conferences don't create that.
No,
the expectation that you
my
go
PR team talked to me about going to conferences, and I can't be bothered anymore for that exact reason. I mean, I just find them anti-human and unfriendly, and so it's nice to hear that you've recognized that, and you want this to be more about human experience and people sharing. That's what I'm hearing. Is that?
Yeah, completely. We've got like Hannah Beecham, who set up Red January, which is a movement that's been going for a few years now. Has raised millions of pounds for mental health charities. Yeah. She set it up, or she started her mum was struggling with her health, and she wanted to do something to support her mum in that month of January, which is such a tricky month. And that, again, these simple ideas of oh yeah, that's a good idea. January, let's try and get outside and do a bit of exercise every day.
Yeah.
And that simple idea, as you say, like, has now ended up making millions of pounds for charity, and like hundreds of thousands of people take part in Red January every year. So Hannah, I'm really looking forward to hearing Hannah talking and hopefully inspiring other people in the audience to maybe have those ideas that, oh, maybe I could do something like that, because it doesn't.
And are you going to be presenting as well, John? Are you going to be doing something there yourself?
I very, very, again, back to, I've kind of prefer to be in the background.
Gone back to the back seat again.
I've been printing. That's while I've been trying not to fall asleep with the jet lag. I've been printing kind of badges and lanyards today, and making sure the conference program's gone to the printers. So I myself and Joe Emerson, who's the co-CEO of Speakers Collective, we're opening the conference. We'll say hello. We'll do the exits are over there and the toilets are there. And yes, that's the code for the Wi-Fi.
I'm sure I've met Jo. I seem to remember Jo from things.
Yeah, she's wonderful. And so I'm just hopefully enjoying, just going to sit back and enjoy listening to the speakers.
And the conference is this weekend. I'm just looking at the website.
So the web, to find out about the conference, it's the second year. We did it just as we were coming out of whatever phase we were last November.
Yes.
It's called it's hopeconference.co.uk. So we plan to do it every year. And we do it on the 11th of November because that's my dad's birthday. And when we were trying to find a date for the conference last year, we were like, oh, November seems like a good time. And then also it kind of coincides with Remembrance Day as well. Yeah. And so we have like we were a bit tight on the program last year. So Joe always kind of ribs me that when I was doing the program, I said, we haven't got time for 2 minutes silence. We could maybe a minute. But we've made sure this year that we've definitely got 2 minutes silence in the program to reflect, I guess.
James has put the website link out for sure. Are there other websites associated with you that people can find out what you're doing?
Yeah, so speakerscollective.org and jon-salmon.com. If you want to donate to we raised, like, this is something lovely. Last thing I really want to share is not just how incredible it was, people cheering, doing the New York Marathon, but wow, right? John and I were running for not just, it wasn't a UK charity. It wasn't an American charity. It was a charity based in New York. And we raised over $7,500. And the generosity of individuals, and it doesn't matter if it's $1 or £5 or 50 quid. Obviously, the more money you make, the better. But just getting your credit card out is a hassle, right? And finding those 3 digits on the back. And we had hundreds of people that went to that effort and donated. And again, that's just a really, really, just want to thank everybody that has donated and supported John and I, because times are busy and it takes time out of people's day to stop and donate.
It's also, I would say, more important that these issues are raised right now, post-pandemic, but also during the current crises that we're going through, and the sort of the straitened financial times bring. We know that when people are worried about money, that they can start to think about ending their life, particularly men. And it's really, really important that we're having these conversations now and that we're highlighting issues such as organizations such as Samaritans, the Hope Conference, because people will be struggling. And I think we just have to get this message across about, we tend to think of mental health struggles as the sort of, they're not real in some way. They're not the same as if you've broken your arm. It's not as gritty, but actually, this kills people.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Samaritans, amazing organisation of over 20,000 volunteers in the UK that give their time up and can be contacted on 116 123 24 hours a day. When Samaritans just there to listen, right? And it's an incredible organisation, and they're there to listen. If you're struggling. Well,
I mean, certainly I leave this conversation feeling a lot more hope than I came into it. So thank you for offering me that and sharing that with me. I'm really glad to have you back, and I'm sort of fingers crossed. Birmingham's my hometown, by the way.
Right, so, what are you doing on Friday?
Well, exactly. I might just be buying a ticket later after this, and I'm seriously thinking about it. So I'm not doing anything, so I might just pop up.
I think even the Christmas markets may have started as well.
Yeah, there's a good one in Birmingham City Centre as well. The German market there is pretty good, actually.
That's exactly where the conference is. So it's right next to the.
Well, Birmingham City Centre these days is a really pleasant place to be.
Lovely.
It really is.
Yeah.
So they've really done a good job around the city centre.
It's brilliant. Yeah. Go to Birmingham.
Yeah, I'm really thinking about that now. Actually, I want to, because I didn't know about the Hope Conference, because although Teresa sent me the email, I'm just going to embarrass her and say that I didn't see it. But it's my fault, not Teresa's. Well, so I'll see you on Friday. Actually,
I'll make you up a badge tonight.
Great. I can't not go now. But it'd be nice to see Johnny Benjamin and everybody again. So there are lots of really good people in this field, very inspiring people. And I guess just to leave on this note, it's what's wonderful for me, and I might start crying if I'm not careful, is there I go. It's because I've been doing this for so many years, and I've sort of worked on hospital closures and community-based services, and for me it's such a joy to see this shift in mental health provision away from can we make the bins of the psychiatric ward slightly more pleasant too? No, let's not go there. Let's encourage mental well-being, psychological well-being on a daily basis, and give people the tools and resources we know that work. And by broadening it out in this way, it means that we're more likely to improve provision further downstream.
Yeah.
It's the only way it can work, I think.
Completely agree.
We have to do this. And then at some point in the future, we'll get rid of the Mental Health Act. And when somebody has a psychotic break, they'll be met with something very, very different. They won't be locked away. Something else will happen. And that's where we need to be aiming for. Anyway, no more soapboxes. It's just gorgeous to see you. And welcome back to the UK. And I'm in awe of your ability to stay awake at this point after running a marathon and flying back from New York. So congratulations.
Yeah, well, thank you for keeping me on the back on the UK time zone. So
cool. Good to have you. Stay there. I'm going to say goodbye to everybody, and I'll see you all next week. I'm not sure. I can't remember who we got, and I usually get a list of people. I can never really remember. So there you go. But it's been lovely to have everybody here this evening, and see you all next week. Bye-bye for now.